Fox News alert, lawmakers are grilling witnesses right now about the Benghazi attack that killed a U.S. ambassador and 3 other members of the diplomatic team there. You're looking live at the first hearing of the House Select Committee. The chair of that committee, Republican Trey Gowdy, promises to keep politics out of it. Democrats signed on saying they hope to try to ensure that. Is it possible, though? Charlie Hurt is a columnist with The Washington Times. Lynn Sweet is Washington bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times. Welcome to both of you. Lynn, to you first. Trey Gowdy is known to be a pretty conservative member of Congress, but he's also a former federal prosecutor, says he wants to absolutely ensure this is a fair proceeding. How do you assess it thus far? Just got underway.
Thus far, he has done exactly what he said. First of all, he delayed the hearings that were supposed to originally be scheduled this summer so they could do more research, so they wouldn't just have a inflammatory approach. And to ensure that, the other thing he did that was very reasonable to avoid being called partisan was to have only 1 hearing scheduled before the November election.
He has promised, Charlie, to put his personal ambitions and all of that aside. How do you do that when you're a member of Congress, you know, in front of the television cameras? These things tend to turn into political theater.
Well, I think, you know, obviously everything is politics here in Washington. But, you know, Trey Gowdy is a very serious kind of guy. He, as you mentioned, he is a seasoned federal prosecutor. And he's been given very strict instructions from the Speaker that this is not to devolve into partisan politics. And I, quite frankly, agree with Lynn that I think that, you know, that so far he has strived mightily to keep that from happening. But that said, of course, and I think this is a gamble that a lot of Republicans are sort of relying on, is that the facts here are pretty damaging and pretty damning, and because of that, they don't need to spin them, and they don't need to, you know, to try to make them into obvious partisan points. Just simply laying out the facts of what happened that night in Benghazi, and then what happened the next morning, and then what has happened in the days, weeks, and years since by the administration and others to cover up their role in it. I think that all of that stuff is quite damning. I was interested in Trey Gowdy's opening remarks that he did very forcefully make the point that a lot of what we're still seeing today going on is tied to at least the same types of people who are trying to hurt America with ISIS and or ISIL or whatever you want to call them. It's the same sort of thing. So it really does sort of makes the issue very much alive today.
Yeah, Lynn, it is a good point. I mean, at the time these attacks took place a little more than 2 years ago, nobody was talking about ISIS, for instance.
That's true, and so anytime there's a new context, you could see things in a new light. But I want to underscore what Charlie said. By having this considered approach that Congressman Gowdy is taking means that I think what he's looking for is the big view for the historic record. As Democrats pointed out in a press conference they had yesterday, a bit of a preemptive strike, a lot of this is material that has been gone over, as we all know and all your viewers know. There have been multiple hearings on this. I think that means that he has a higher bar here for the historic record to dig up new information. That's the point of having this select committee, and that, I think, is the test by which he will be measured by the history of this case.
Yeah, it is going to be. I'm sorry.
And it's just, and I think for his own means of looking for the historic record, it was very smart to have a kind of a non-controversial hearing today, and then get into the topic deeper when they come back after the election.
We'll see what they come up with, and to that point, Lynn Sweet, Charlie Hurt, thank you both. We want to go back to those hearings now. Thanks, and John. Just listen in for a couple of minutes.
Read reports of that, sir.
Okay. You were once a RSO, correct?
Yes, sir.
In your distinguished career, do you ever remember recommending that a service not be used that you were familiar with anywhere, and then them being hired over your protest or your recommendation?
Not in my experience, sir.
Okay. But you would have at some point recommended somebody, or maybe not recommended anybody? I mean, was it your job to look at the performance of these people that you were aware of?
When
and
we
report it?
As an RSO, when we have guard contracts, if we find that our contractor is not performing, we have a variety of ways we can deduct money, or we can ultimately find that they're not performing. And if they're found to be lacking and can't perform the contract, they can be terminated. They can be barred. They can actually be barred if that goes that far.
All right. You had mentioned the 17th, February 17th, the Martyrs Brigade, I believe is what it was called. And we have been told that that was basically the host company security. Is that true or not?
I would hesitate to call that host country security, sir. I think at best it probably had some control in that area of the city, but this is based on what I've read from the reports.
Is there an individual that would be at the post that would be responsible for ensuring that the 17th Brigade was responsible and dependable?
Sir, I wasn't there at the time. As a former RSO, I can probably tell you that there were likely limited choices, and one of the things that an RSO would do at that point, if he was faced with limited choices, was try to train them as best he could, to try to make the best of whatever situation he was handed.
He would have to train the February Brigade? Or?
If he found that they were not up to the levels that he wanted, he would engage and assist in the training and making sure that they understood the guard orders and to make sure that they had the capabilities that were necessary.
Okay. Now, let's say that, and they were hired to, in case there was an attack inside the compound, to respond. Who would have had the contact information, and who would have been responsible on the post for contacting the this protective brigade of martyrs?
There were, as I read the reports, sir, again, I was not here at the time, there were personnel on the compound. They had telephone communication.
We are continuing to monitor the House Select Committee hearing on Benghazi. It started at about 10 o'clock Eastern time today. That hearing still underway on Capitol Hill, as we were just taking a live listen to that. We've been going to various people for reaction to what's coming out of this first public hearing on Benghazi, or at least from the Select Committee. So let's now talk to Rick Rennell. He's a former advisor to 4 U.S. ambassadors to the United Nations. Rick, welcome. They were just talking a moment ago about some of the militias that our consulate relied on for security on that day. It was called the September 17th Brigade. One of the focuses of this committee is whether or not we've learned from our mistakes. Do you believe that we've learned from that mistake in relying on a local militia to secure our compounds?
Well, I don't think that we've learned from our mistakes at all, because really no one's been punished and no one has been able to be fingered as saying this is something that we did wrong. We've got the entire State Department scrambling to pretend that everybody followed the rules. Look, Heather, one of the main problems here, and it's really frustrating for me to watch these hearings, because the State Department is really good at spinning. I'll give you one example. When the State Department says we didn't issue a stand-down order, what they mean and what they're referring to is the formal process of orders that the State Department gives. That's a formal diplomatic piece of paper that's given on the classified side. It's called an order. I agree there probably wasn't time to give a formal order, but clearly somebody told these individuals to stay down. We know that because the people on the ground said we were told to stand back. That's new information. Adam Schiff and all of these other Democrats who held a press conference yesterday, it's frustrating for me to see them comfortably ensconced on Capitol Hill, pretending like they know what happened that day and that specific time in Benghazi. This guy who's talking, who is called an RSO, a regional security officer.
They're the ones in charge
He
of the
wasn't
security
there either.
yeah.
He's a management guy. Regional security officers are management. They're not the guys on the ground who are protecting. And what we have here is a fundamental problem, is that the guys on the ground are telling their real story of what happened. And you got a bunch of management pretending like, well, that's not exactly what happened. They weren't there, and the Democrats who are in Congress weren't there. Neither were the Republicans.
You know,
we need to listen to the
Rick,
people who are on the ground.
If you recall, we heard from Charlene Lamb a few months back when she was the person who basically turned down the locals' request, the locals as in our people, request for more security. Do you think that there is going to be a better coordination between the folks in Washington so they are getting the resources that our people on the ground who are doing valiant work all across the world in many dangerous spots, are they now going to get the resources they need in light of what happened in Benghazi?
Let me make one thing very, very clear. The State Department has a ton of money. They have plenty of money to provide security for all of the diplomatic posts that need high security.
Well, heck, they
Go
didn't do
look
it in
at
Benghazi.
European capitals. Well, go look at European capitals. We've got a whole bunch of money being spent on our embassies in London and Madrid and a whole bunch of places that are a lot safer that don't need as much money. The State Department, Secretary Clinton at the time, Hillary Clinton, decides how to spend that money. Nobody tells her to don't spend money on the Benghazi support system or security and spend a whole bunch of more money on the European capitals. She decides how to divvy up that money. Clearly, the State Department did not put enough money into high security, diplomatic
Risk
posts,
situations, yeah, especially when the folks on the ground said that they
dangerous
needed
posts like Benghazi.
Hey, let me ask you about this. The State Department sent out a fact sheet earlier today saying that they've implemented 24, I believe. It's a little hard for me to read here, my eyes. But most of the recommendations that the Accountability Review Board put forward. Do you believe that this is enough to keep our American personnel safe? Because that's really essentially what it's all about. Accountability, what happened in Benghazi, and then going forward, keeping our people safe.
Yeah, let me say one thing very clearly to the Democrats who don't think Benghazi is a big deal. This is about future safety. This is about the decisions that were made not to put enough security in a dangerous post. We've got to fix that. It's not fixed, Heather. I mean, it's not fixed simply because the State Department is scrambling, pretending like they did everything right. The Accountability Review Board was a joke. It didn't even interview the people who were responsible for trying to figure out where the money went. Patrick Kennedy and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. One quick thing, we also learned yesterday that an individual saw documents being dumped. This individual was a Deputy Assistant Secretary at the State Department who gave money to President Obama, who supported President Obama, who now says that he's being railroaded.
Yeah, and that was Raymond Maxwell. We're going to hear more on that. He's expected to come before the committee at some point, but not today. Rick Rennell, thanks so much as we continue to watch what's happening out of Washington. A lot going on today. Thank you so much.